I thought I was different. I've said that sentence to myself many times since, each time with a slightly different inflection, sometimes wry, sometimes genuinely baffled, occasionally still with a residue of the original conviction, which tells me the work isn't fully done. The belief that you are different from the people who make a particular kind of mistake is one of the most effective mechanisms we have for making that exact mistake. It operates precisely because it feels like self-knowledge. I have examined this pattern, you tell yourself. I understand how people fall into it. I am not that person. And that certainty, that examined, confident, entirely sincere certainty, is exactly the condition under which the pattern finds its opening. I was 31 when I started working for a man who was, and I say this now with the clarity of someone who has been through it and done the reading and spoken to other people who've been through it, a classic, textbook narcissist. I know how that sounds. The word is overused. It's been expanded by popular culture to cover a range of self-involved behaviors that don't meet clinical threshold. What I mean is the specific, diagnosable pattern, a person who genuinely lacks the capacity for empathy, who manages people through alternating idealization and devaluation, who constructs relationships designed to serve their needs and dismantles them the moment they stop. His name was Griffin. He was charismatic in a way that felt, at the time, like the most personally directed attention I'd ever experienced. He made me feel, in the first 6 months of working with him, that I was seen with unusual precision. He knew what I wanted professionally and reflected it back to me in a way that felt like genuine investment. I knew about narcissism. I had friends who'd been through it. I had read about it. I thought, I would see it. I would recognize the pattern. I was not the person who gets taken in by this. The idealization phase is designed specifically to disarm people who think they would see it. The attention is calibrated to your particular vulnerabilities, your specific desires, your specific blind spots, in a way that feels like genuine understanding because it's built from accurate information. Griffin was good at his job. He had watched people closely for years, and he knew what each person needed to feel valued. He gave me exactly that, precisely tailored, for about 7 months. Then the devaluation began. Gradually, as it always does. A slight edge in his feedback. A public comment that was just critically enough framed to land with impact. A shift in his availability, still present, still engaged, but with a changed temperature. Cold where it used to be warm. The mechanism of the devaluation is that it's partial. He didn't become consistently unkind. He oscillated. Warmth returned intermittently, enough to keep me oriented toward the warmth, working to understand what had changed, trying to recover the condition of being in favor. This is what the cycle is designed to do, keep you working toward the approval rather than stepping back to examine why you need it. I knew this. I had the intellectual framework for it. And I was doing exactly what the framework describes. Being inside it and knowing the framework exists simultaneously is a specific kind of cognitive experience. You can observe yourself enacting the pattern while enacting it. You can name, accurately, what is happening, and still feel the pull of the next possible warmth more strongly than the pull toward the exit. I stayed in that working relationship for 2.5 years. I stayed past the point where the intellectual framework should have been sufficient to get me out, because knowing about a dynamic is not the same as being immune to it. The emotional system and the intellectual system operate somewhat independently, and in the presence of someone skilled at activating the emotional system, the intellectual system's commentary can be very loud and still not strong enough to determine behavior. What finally got me out was not a moment of insight, I'd had many of those. It was exhaustion. A specific, comprehensive tiredness with the energy expenditure of managing the cycle, the oscillation, the uncertainty, the continuous recalibration towards someone else's approval. I left and I processed it in therapy, and I've built a different relationship with my need for external validation since. That last part is the real work. Not how do I identify narcissists, I can identify them. But, what in me makes that particular dynamic so activating? What am I looking for that those early months seem to provide? Answering that question honestly has been more protective than any amount of pattern recognition. Because the pattern recognition tells you what to watch out for. Understanding your own vulnerabilities tells you what to not bring to the situation in the first place. I thought I was different. I wasn't. And knowing that, really knowing it, not as a self-criticism but as an honest piece of self-information, has made me more careful in every subsequent encounter with people who are very, very good at being whatever you need them to be. The warning sign is the perfection of the fit. Real people don't fit perfectly. They're complicated and inconsistent and not always what you need. Whoever fits perfectly, at the start, deserves a second look. That's the thing I know now. The hard way. What I've learned about the pattern I've described, the specific mechanism, the way it operates below the level of conscious decision, is that it doesn't respond to willpower alone. Willpower is useful for short-term resistance. For the long-term restructuring of a deep habit or tendency, you need something different. You need to understand what the pattern is doing for you. What it's providing. What it would cost you to give it up. Every destructive pattern has a function. That's the uncomfortable truth. We don't maintain things that don't serve us in some way, even if the service is maladaptive, even if the cost is greater than the benefit. The pattern of staying when I should have left, or not seeing what was in front of me, or following the feeling without examining it, each of those had a function. Protection from loss. Management of fear. Maintenance of an identity that required me to believe certain things about myself or others. Understanding the function doesn't excuse the pattern. But it makes the change possible in a way that pure willpower doesn't. Because once you understand what the pattern is doing, you can ask, is there another way to meet that need? Can I get the protection, or manage the fear, or maintain whatever I need to maintain, through a behavior that doesn't cost me what this one does? Usually the answer is yes. Usually there is a better path to the same destination. You just have to be willing to find it, which requires first being willing to admit what you were trying to reach. That's the hardest part. Not the change itself. The honesty that makes change possible. I'm still working on it. I think everyone is. The work doesn't end. It just gets more familiar. And familiar, at least, is something you can navigate. Even in the dark. There's a particular quality of mourning I've noticed in the period after working through something significant. A specific lightness. Not happiness, exactly, not the performed kind, not the kind that requires circumstances to be good. Something more elemental, the sensation of being present in your own life instead of slightly beside it. I chased that sensation for years before I understood that it wasn't something that arrived. It was something you had to create the conditions for. And the conditions are, at their core, very simple: honesty with yourself about what's happening, willingness to feel what the situation asks you to feel, and the courage to take the action you know is needed even when the action is uncomfortable. Simple to describe. Difficult to execute. Difficult in ways that are specifically, personally yours, in the ways your history makes difficult, your particular fears, your particular blind spots. But that difficulty is not a wall. It's a map. The places where you find the most resistance are usually the places most worth going. I spent time going around the resistance. Managing it, distracting from it, building elaborate structures to not have to walk through it. The structures consumed more energy than walking through the resistance ever did. I just didn't know that until I started walking through. The story I've told here is the story of one chapter. One specific set of choices in one specific situation. But the mechanism, the way the pattern operated, the way I enabled or avoided or mistook or missed, that mechanism has appeared in other forms in other chapters. It probably will again. Not identically. But recognizably. What I carry forward is the recognition itself. The specific texture of the thing when it's happening. The way my body registers it before my mind catches up. The particular quality of the avoidance or the escalation or the wrong certainty. Learning to recognize the mechanism faster. Acting on the recognition sooner. That's the work. And it's worth doing. Every single time. I want to leave you with the thing I wish someone had told me earlier. Not a formula. Not a framework with steps. Something simpler and harder. Most of what we avoid in ourselves is survivable. The feeling we don't want to feel, the conversation we don't want to have, the truth we don't want to acknowledge, we avoid them because we believe, on some level, that having them will break something. That the reality is too large to hold. That if we stop managing around it, it will overwhelm us. It usually doesn't. What breaks us is more often the managing, the ongoing, exhausting, expensive work of keeping something at bay. The thing itself, when we finally let it in, is almost always more survivable than the anticipation of it. I know this from experience. From specific, personal, hard-won experience. The thing I dreaded most in the story I've told you was not as large as the managing of it. The moment I stopped managing and started facing was difficult, yes. But it was bounded. It had a shape. It moved. Things you manage around don't move. They sit in exactly the same place, requiring the same amount of energy to maintain, for as long as you're willing to keep paying. I stopped being willing. And what was underneath was not a catastrophe. It was just the truth. And the truth, it turns out, was something I could hold. So can you.